You're gonna be okay. Someone found you.
The most powerful alpha in Korea was on his knees. Not in surrender. Not in prayer. He was kneeling in front of a man who belonged to someone else, pressing a silver bracelet into trembling hands, his voice so quiet it barely existed, and saying the words no alpha of his rank was ever supposed to say to an omega. I've been looking for you for 5 years. And I'm not leaving without you. The room was Seo-jin Lee's own boardroom. The man on the receiving end of those words was Jack Heater. Bonded, legally married, standing 2 steps behind his husband like a shadow that had learned to be silent. And the husband, Adam Thomas, was still sitting at the table, watching, his smile going rigid at the edges like something rotting behind glass. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because everyone in that room understood something in the same instant. This was not a business meeting anymore. This was a reckoning 5 years in the making. But to understand why Korea's most feared alpha was kneeling, you have to go back to the night everything started. Back to a warehouse fire in Daejeon that was never supposed to have a survivor. Back to one Omega who ran toward the explosion when every other person ran away. And back to the moment Jack Heater pulled a bleeding, unconscious stranger onto his back, through collapsing steel, through walls of fire, through smoke so thick he navigated by sound alone, and carried him out into the night. He didn't know the man's name. He didn't know the man was the heir to a billion-dollar empire. He didn't know the explosion was a planned assassination, or that the men who ordered it were watching from across the street. All Jack knew was this: someone was going to die if he didn't move. So he moved. He pulled. He carried. He walked through fire with another man's weight on his back and his jaw locked and his eyes forward, exactly like the image burned into Seo-jin's memory even now, 5 years later, every time he closes his eyes. Before the ambulances reached them, Jack slipped off his medical bracelet, silver, engraved with his name on the inside, and pressed it into the stranger's palm. You're going to be okay, he said. Someone found you. Then he disappeared into the crowd. He told himself he'd have done it for anyone. He almost believed it. That stranger woke up in a private hospital 40 hours later with a bracelet in his fist and no memory of a face, only dark, steady eyes. Only the sensation of being carried. Of being chosen, in the dark, by someone who owed him absolutely nothing. Seo-jin Lee rebuilt his empire. Hunted his enemies. Grew colder and more precise with every passing year. And every single day, for 5 years, he searched for the Omega who saved his life. He found him. He just didn't expect to find him like this, standing behind a man like Adam Thomas, eyes trained carefully at the floor, a bruise fading at his wrist. Carrying himself like someone who had learned that taking up space was a privilege he no longer had. The same hands that pulled Seo-jin through fire. Folded. Still. Obedient. Something locked into place behind Seo-jin's eyes, cold and absolute and final. He looked at Adam Thomas across the boardroom table. He looked at Jack. He reached into his desk drawer, closed his fingers around the bracelet, and made a decision that would dismantle everything Adam Thomas had spent 3 years building. Mr. Thomas, Seo-jin said, his voice silk over steel. I'm interested in your proposal. Let's continue this conversation over dinner. He paused. All 3 of us. Adam smiled. He thought he'd won something. He had no idea he'd just walked his most valuable possession into the hands of the one man on earth willing to burn the world down to return him to himself. This is the story of Jack Heater, an Omega who saved a king and forgot his own worth. And Seo-jin Lee, an alpha who built an empire just to have something worthy of giving back. And the 5 years of fire between them that neither one ever really left. It was supposed to be a routine survey. That was the word Jack used later, in the quiet part of his mind where he still processed things, routine. A late-night site assessment for a commercial development project adjacent to the Daejeon Industrial Quarter. Boring work. Necessary work. The kind of job a 24-year-old junior architect took without complaint because it meant his name stayed on the roster and his supervisor remembered he existed. He had his clipboard. His flashlight. His silver medical bracelet on his left wrist. The one his mother insisted he wear after his Omega designation came in late and complicated, the one engraved on the inside with his full name and emergency contact in characters so small you had to hold it to a light to read them. He had all of that. And then the warehouse across the access road detonated like the earth was correcting a mistake. The sound was not a boom. It was a pressure, a physical wall of force that knocked Jack off his feet before the noise even registered, before the orange light bloomed up into the night sky and turned the industrial quarter into something that looked like the end of a world. He hit the ground hard, clipboard skidding away, flashlight spinning into the dark. For 3 full seconds he lay there while his ears rang and his vision strobed and every reasonable instinct he possessed screamed at him to stay down. Around him, people were running. Site workers. A night security guard. 2 men in suits who had been standing near the warehouse gate and were now moving with the kind of practiced speed that had nothing to do with panic. The speed of men who had been waiting for exactly this. Everyone was moving away from the fire. Jack got to his feet. Looked at the burning building. Looked at the people running. And ran toward it. He never made a decision. That was the thing he couldn't explain afterward. In the rare moments he let himself revisit it. There was no moment of heroic resolve, no internal monologue about duty or courage. His body simply oriented itself toward the source of danger the way a compass needle finds north. Automatic, involuntary, idiotic. The side entrance had buckled but not collapsed. Jack shouldered through it with his forearm over his mouth and his eyes streaming from the smoke, and the heat hit him like a living thing, pressing against his skin, filling his lungs, turning every breath into a negotiation. The interior was chaos in slow motion. Burning debris. Collapsed shelving. A section of the upper floor had come down in a diagonal collapse that had, by some geometry of disaster, created a survivable pocket near the northeast wall. That was where he found him. A man. Dark-haired. Dressed in what had been an expensive suit before the fire got to it. Pinned from the waist down under a section of steel crossbeam that had fallen at an angle, one end still resting on a concrete support column, which was the only reason the full weight wasn't lethal. His face was turned to the side, ash-dusted, blood tracking from a gash at his temple. Unconscious. Breathing, barely. Jack didn't know his name. Didn't know his face. Didn't know that the men in suits outside had put him there deliberately. He knew one thing. The ceiling above them was groaning with a sound like a held breath about to break. He moved. He couldn't lift the beam. He didn't try. He found the angle, the same architectural instinct that served him in structural assessments, and identified the point of least resistance, shoved the debris supporting the lower end, and used the resulting shift to drag the man clear. It took 4 attempts. His hands bled. He stopped noticing. When the man was free, Jack crouched, maneuvered those dead-weight arms over his shoulders, and stood. The weight was enormous. The man was taller than him, broader, completely limp, every kilogram of him pressing down on Jack's spine like a verdict. Jack's legs shook once. He locked his knees. Set his jaw. Looked forward. Walked. Through burning debris. Through a secondary collapse that sent a curtain of sparks across his back. Through smoke so dense he stopped using his eyes entirely and navigated by memory. 12 steps to the buckled door, left shoulder to the frame, through. And then cold air. Night sky. Gravel under his boots. He made it 30 meters from the building before his legs finally had the conversation his will had been refusing to allow, and he went down on one knee, lowering the man carefully before he dropped him. The stranger was breathing. Steadier now. His hand fell open against the gravel. Jack looked at that open hand. Then he unclipped his medical bracelet, silver, his name engraved inside, and pressed it into the stranger's palm. Closed those fingers around it. "You're going to be okay," he said quietly. "Someone found you." In the distance, sirens. Blue light beginning to paint the smoke. Jack stood up. Looked once more at the man's face, still, blooded, firelight moving across sharp features like something being slowly revealed. Then he walked into the crowd and let the darkness take him. He told himself he'd have done it for anyone. He almost believed it. Seojin Lee woke on a Tuesday. He knew this because the nurse who was adjusting his foreline told him so when he asked, and because the window showed afternoon light at the particular angle that meant east-facing glass, private floor, somewhere above the city noise. He catalogued these details before he opened his eyes fully. Before he moved. Before he let anyone in the room know that the machinery behind his face was already running. It was a habit his father had drilled into him at 12 years old. Never let a room know you're awake until you understand the room. He understood this one in approximately 40 seconds. Private hospital. High-end. His own security on the door, two of them, posture too careful, which meant they'd been briefed to look relaxed and weren't managing it. A doctor waiting with the particular expression of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say. And his board's appointed liaison, Park Sung-jae, sitting near the window with a tablet and the body language of someone who had already decided what the narrative was going to be. Seo-jin let his eyes close again for 3 more seconds. Then he opened them and said, quietly, "Tell me." Gas leak. Industrial accident. Faulty pipeline in the warehouse district, a tragedy compounded by outdated infrastructure. 3 workers hospitalized, none critically. The Lee family's Daejeon facility had sustained significant damage, but the insurance assessment was already underway and the board had been managing communications in Seo-jin's absence to minimize market impact. Park Sung-jae delivered all of this with the smooth efficiency of a man presenting a quarterly report. Seo-jin listened without expression. When it was finished, he said, "Leave me. Mr. Lee, there are decisions that require leave." They left. When the room was empty, Seo-jin looked at his right hand. He had been holding something since he woke, his fist closed around it with the particular grip of a man clutching the only solid thing in a dissolving world. He opened his fingers slowly. A bracelet. Silver. Thin. The kind worn for medical identification, not decoration. The clasp simple, the metal worn smooth in the way of something used daily rather than displayed. He turned it over. On the inside, engraved in small, precise characters. Jack Heater. An emergency contact number beneath the name. The engraving slightly uneven, like it had been done at one of those small kiosks rather than a jeweler. Practical. Personal. The kind of object that belonged to someone who needed it to mean something, not someone who wanted it to look like something. Seo-jin stared at it for a long time. A gas leak. He had been in the syndicate infrastructure long enough to know the difference between an accident and a message. He knew the smell of a coordinated hit, the particular geometry of a collapse that was too clean, the witnesses who scattered too quickly, the board liaison who arrived too prepared. He had, in the preceding 18 months, made exactly 3 decisions that directly threatened the financial interests of 4 board members who had been managing Obsidian Crown's Grey operations since before he took the chair. He knew who had done this. He also knew he had been unconscious for 72 hours, which meant they had had 72 hours to consolidate. He closed his fist around the bracelet again. First things first. His recovery was performed as theater. Publicly, Seo-jin Lee was diminished. Shaken. A young CEO humbled by a near-death experience, retreating from operational control to recuperate, deferring board decisions with the meekness of a man who had learned his limits. He gave one carefully staged press appearance from a wheelchair, pale, quiet, grateful to be alive. The market stabilized. The board relaxed. Privately, he rebuilt everything. From a secure room in a medical facility that cost more per night than most people earned in a month, Seo-jin reconstructed his intelligence network from first principles. He identified which of his people had been turned. He found new ones. He began, with the patience of someone who had decided that speed was less important than permanence, to build the architecture of a counterstrike that would take years to complete, because he wanted it to be total. He did all of this in silence. In apparent weakness. And in every spare moment between strategy and vengeance, he ran a parallel search. Jack Heater. The name was not common, but it was not unique. The number engraved on the bracelet had been disconnected, a prepaid contact, long expired. The name returned results in professional directories, a university enrollment record, a junior architectural firm's staff listing that went inactive after 18 months. And then, nothing. The trail didn't go cold so much as it went quiet, like a person who had deliberately reduced their footprint. Or been reduced by someone else. Dead ends accumulated. Wrong leads. Twice he thought they had him, and twice the lead dissolved into someone else entirely. The bracelet stayed in his desk drawer. Every office he occupied over 5 years, 3 cities, 2 countries, 4 headquarters as Obsidian Crown expanded, the bracelet traveled with him. In a small case. In the top left drawer. Always within reach. His executive team learned not to ask about it. People assumed, over the years, that Seojin Lee had never bonded because he found the institution strategically inconvenient. This was partially true. He had watched bonding used as leverage too many times to approach it without calculation. He had seen what unchecked alpha instinct produced in men like his board members: entitlement dressed as protection, possession dressed as devotion. He had decided, early, that he would not be that. What he had not decided, what he had never needed to decide before a Tuesday morning in a private hospital with a stranger's bracelet in his fist, was what it felt like to owe someone something that had no price. Not money. Not power. Not reciprocal advantage. His life. Given back to him by someone who slipped away before he could even learn their face. Someone who asked for nothing. Expected nothing. Left only a name engraved in small, uneven characters on a piece of silver that cost less than his coffee. Seojin had built an empire. He had done it, in some corner of himself he didn't examine directly, so that when he finally found Jack Heater, he would have something worth offering in return. If I find him, he had told himself in the early years, I will have something worth giving. The years passed. The empire grew. The bracelet stayed in the drawer. And Seojin Lee, the most powerful alpha in Korean corporate history, went home every night to a penthouse that had every possible thing in it, and sat in the silence of a man still waiting for the one thing he couldn't acquire. He was still searching. He just didn't know yet that the man he was looking for had spent those same 5 years being slowly extinguished by someone who should have protected him. He would know soon. And when he did, the patience he had spent 5 years cultivating would become something else entirely. The apartment was stunning. 4 to second floor, floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of Seoul that people paid photographers to capture. Marble countertops. Curated art. A kitchen that had been designed by someone who understood that the appearance of abundance was its own form of control. Everything perfect, everything selected, everything in its place. Jack stood at the window with his morning coffee and looked out at the city and felt, as he did most mornings, the particular exhaustion of a man who had slept 8 hours and woken up tired. Adam had already left. Early meeting, he'd said, straightening his cuffs in the hallway mirror with the practiced ease of a man who had never once doubted his own reflection. He'd kissed Jack's temple on the way out, proprietorial, brief, the kind of contact that marked rather than connected. The apartment still held the trace of his scent, the way bonded spaces always did. Familiar. Inescapable. Jack drank his coffee and did not think about this. He had married Adam Thomas 28 months ago. On paper, it was a reasonable match. Adam was presentable, professionally established, from a family with the kind of old money that didn't need to announce itself. He had pursued Jack with a consistency that Jack, at the time, had mistaken for devotion. He had been attentive to Jack's omega needs in public, solicitous, protective, the kind of alpha who used words like partnership and equal standing in a world that didn't always offer either to omegas. Jack had been, he understood now, impressively stupid about it. Not naive. Jack had never been naive. But he had been tired. 26 years old, 2 years out of a career stall he hadn't fully recovered from, privately worn down by a world that treated his designation as either a vulnerability to exploit or a commodity to manage. Adam had seemed like solid ground. Solid ground, it turned out, could also be a cage floor. The suppressants were the first thing. Adam had framed it as concern. Jack's omega cycles had always been irregular, always complicated, and Adam's insistence on managing the prescription schedule had the surface texture of care. You forget, babe. You always forget. Let me handle it. And Jack, who did sometimes forget, had let him. He understood now what that permission had cost him. The suppressants Adam managed were correct. He wasn't medicating Jack into something he wasn't, but the schedule was calibrated at the low end of effective. Enough to function. Not enough to feel fully like himself. The difference was subtle, the kind of thing that didn't announce itself as wrongness but simply made everything slightly harder, concentration a fraction slower, instincts a degree muted, the sharp edges of his personality sanded down just enough that he second-guessed them. Jack knew this. He had known it for at least a year. He had not yet done anything about it, which was the part he couldn't explain to himself without arriving at a conclusion he wasn't ready to reach. The work was the other thing. Jack had been an architect. A real one, Not just technically credentialed, but gifted, the kind of designer who understood space as emotional language, who could look at a structural problem and find a solution that was also, somehow, beautiful. His thesis project had been shortlisted for a National Student Award. His early freelance portfolio had drawn genuine attention. Adam had not forbidden him from working. He was too intelligent for that. What he had done was subtler, a comment here, a hesitation there. Are you sure this firm is the right fit? I worry they're not taking your work seriously. Meetings that ran long when Jack had interviews scheduled. Introductions that never quite materialized. A gradual, architectural erosion of Jack's professional network until he found himself at a mid-tier firm doing production work on other people's designs, his name nowhere on the documentation that mattered. When Jack had raised it, Adam had been genuinely puzzled. I've always supported your career. I don't know why you frame it like this. And Jack, standing in the beautiful apartment with the stunning view, had wondered for the first time if the problem was actually him. That was the moment he should have recognized. He hadn't. What Adam didn't know about were the files on Jack's personal drive. A separate device, an old tablet, bought secondhand and paid for in cash, kept in a waterproof case behind the panel in the building's basement storage unit that Adam had never once visited. On it, 14 projects. Completed designs, all of them, worked on in stolen hours, during Adam's business trips, during late nights claimed as overtime, during the careful pockets of solitude Jack engineered with the precision of a man who understood that survival required architecture too. The designs were exceptional. Jack knew this with the detached certainty of someone assessing structural load, not arrogance, just accuracy. They were the best work of his life. Done in secret, shown to no one, filed under a pseudonym in 2 small online design communities where no one knew his face or his bond status. Just the work. Clean, honest, his. He hadn't lost his talent. He had learned to hide it, the same way he'd learned to hide everything that mattered, everything Adam's attention would have found a way to diminish. This was what Adam had actually taken from him. Not his ability. Not his eye. Not the part of him that ran toward burning buildings while everyone else ran away. Just his belief that those things were allowed to exist in the light. Jack finished his coffee. Rinsed the cup. Set it precisely in the drying rack. Outside, Seoul blazed under a clear morning sky. He had no idea that 50 floors above a different part of that city, a man had just opened a desk drawer. The private dining floor of Obsidian Crown Group occupied the 51st level of the tower, above the boardrooms, above the executive suites, above everything that could be classified as business. It was used exclusively for meetings that weren't supposed to look like meetings. The kind where the food was exceptional and the power dynamics were decided before anyone sat down. Adam Thomas had dressed for the occasion. New suit, Italian, the kind that communicated old money to people who didn't have it and communicated effort to people who did. He had briefed Jack in the car on the way up, tone, posture, when to smile, when to stay quiet. Jack had looked out the window and said nothing, and Adam had interpreted this as compliance, which was his most consistent mistake. The elevator opened directly into the dining space. Seojin Lee was already there. He was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window when they arrived, his back to the room, looking out at Seoul with the particular stillness of a man who had learned to use silence as a first impression. He turned when he heard them, unhurried, precise, and crossed the room to greet Adam with a handshake and the exact calibration of warmth required to make a man feel significant without actually conferring significance. Mr. Thomas. Thank you for coming. Adam produced his best smile. Mr. Lee. The honor is entirely ours. Seojin's eyes moved to Jack. They stayed there for exactly 1 beat longer than courtesy required. And you are? The question was directed entirely at Jack. Not at Adam. Not at the space between them. At Jack, specifically, with the focused attention of someone who already knew the answer and was watching to see how the introduction was handled. Adam opened his mouth. Jack spoke first. Jack Heater. I'm, a half-second pause, the kind that contained a small war. An architectural designer. Not Adam's spouse. Not my husband's +1. Seojin's expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes did. Mr. Heater. Please, sit. Dinner was conducted with the precision of a performance in which only one person knew the full script. Seo-jin managed Adam with the flawless professionalism of a man who had negotiated with more dangerous people in worse rooms, attentive, measured, asking exactly the right questions about the Thomas development proposal to make Adam believe the deal was progressing. Course by course, Adam expanded. Relaxed. His voice acquired the particular confidence of a man who believes he is the most important person at the table. He was not paying sufficient attention to what was happening at the other end of it. Midway through the second course, Seo-jin reached beside his chair and produced a rolled architectural schematic, building plans, mid-scale commercial development, the kind of document that had no obvious reason to be present at a dinner about a different proposal entirely. He unrolled it beside the table settings with a casualness that was entirely manufactured. "I apologize, I've been looking at this all day and I can't resolve something. Mr. Thomas, you're in development, perhaps you can offer a perspective." Adam leaned forward. Studied it with the expression of a man performing competence. Made two observations that were technically accurate and architecturally meaningless. Seo-jin nodded politely. Then he turned to Jack. "Mr. Hita, you mentioned architectural design. I'd value a second opinion." The table went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something shifts beneath the surface. Jack looked at the schematic. His eyes moved across it with the involuntary focus of a person whose professional instincts had just overridden every social instruction about staying small. His hand moved before he fully decided to let it, index finger tracing the load distribution across the central atrium, not touching the paper, hovering. "The span here is carrying more than the column placement justifies," he said. His voice was different. Steadier. Whoever designed this prioritized the visual openness of the atrium over the structural logic underneath it. "It's not unsafe, but it's inefficient, and you'll pay for it in the long-term maintenance of that eastern wall. If you shifted the secondary support by approximately 2 meters and introduced a tension cable system here," he indicated the point without hesitation, "you resolve the load issue without compromising the aesthetic intention at all." He stopped. The silence lasted 3 seconds. He had not spoken that many consecutive sentences about his own professional opinion in approximately 2 years. Seo-jin was watching him with an expression that could have been mistaken for polite interest. It was not polite interest. It was the look of a man watching something come back to life that had been buried, recognition mixed with something colder and more deliberate underneath. He was also watching Adam, peripherally, with the precision of someone conducting 2 observations simultaneously. Adam's hand had tightened around his wine glass. Not dramatically, a small adjustment, the kind that only registered if you were looking for it. His smile had not moved, but the quality of it had changed. It had become a thing maintained rather than a thing felt. Seo-jin filed all of this in approximately 4 to 5 seconds. He understood the marriage completely. "Exactly right," Seo-jin said to Jack, his voice carrying the quiet weight of a man who meant it without performance. "That's the most precise assessment I've heard on this project." Jack said nothing. He picked up his water glass and looked at the table and did not look at Adam, which told Seo-jin more than the answer itself had. The dinner concluded with appropriate pleasantries. Seo-jin walked them to the elevator, promised a follow-up communication within the week, and shook Adam's hand with a warmth that would keep him optimistic for exactly long enough to be useful. The elevator doors closed. Seo-jin stood in the empty dining room for a moment, looking at the schematic still spread beside the dinner settings. Then he took out his phone and called his intelligence director. "Destroy Adam Thomas's next 3 deals," he said. Quietly. "Nothing traceable." A pause. "And find me every design Jack Hita has ever filed. Any name, any platform, any registration. Everything." He rolled up the schematic. "And do it before morning." The offer arrived by formal courier 3 days after the dinner. Not an email. Not a message through Adam's business channels. A physical envelope, cream stock, the obsidian crown letterhead embossed rather than printed, addressed specifically to Jack Hita at the apartment building, not to Adam Thomas, not to Thomas Development, not to Mr. Hita's spouse in the careful passive construction that most of Adam's professional correspondence used when it acknowledged Jack's existence at all. To Jack Hita. By name. Alone. Jack stood in the building lobby and read it twice before he took the elevator up. The commission was for the renovation of the Obsidian Crown Charitable Foundation headquarters, a mid-century building in Mapo-Gu that the foundation had occupied for 11 years and which had, according to the brief, outgrown its original spatial logic. New programming requirements. Expanded community services. A building that needed to be reconsidered from the inside out, its bones preserved, its function transformed. The brief was detailed, serious, and written with the vocabulary of someone who understood what they were asking for. The budget attached to it was not a gesture. The timeline was reasonable. The creative parameters were, and this was the part Jack read 3 times, entirely at the lead designer's discretion, subject only to foundation approval. Lead designer. His name in that sentence. His discretion. He put the letter down on the kitchen counter and stood very still for a moment. Then he picked it up and read it again, because he had learned not to trust his first reading of things that seemed too much like what he wanted. It was still the same letter. Adam came home at 7. Jack had dinner ready because dinner at 7 was one of the structures of their life together, and Jack had long since learned that disrupting structures created consequences that weren't worth the energy. He waited until after the meal to mention the envelope. He watched Adam read it. The stillness that moved through Adam's face was a specific kind, not blankness, but management. The rapid interior calculation of a man deciding which version of himself to perform. Jack had become, without ever intending to, an expert in Adam's faces. He knew this one. Interesting, Adam said finally. Lee must have been impressed at dinner. Apparently. It's a significant commission for an independent contractor. No firm backing, no team. The brief doesn't require a firm. It's a single lead engagement. A pause. I just wonder if it's the right moment. My proposal with Obsidian Crown is still in negotiation. It could complicate the dynamic if you also. It's addressed to me, Jack said. Not to Thomas Development. There's no conflict. The sentence was quiet. Precise. It landed in the space between them and stayed there. Adam looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was almost curiously assessing, like a man recalibrating an instrument he thought he'd already calibrated. Then he smiled. Of course. It's your decision. Which meant, I cannot stop this without showing you exactly how I would stop it. And Adam, who was many things, was not careless enough to do that. Not yet. Jack accepted the commission the following morning. He started on site the week after. The foundation building was everything the brief had suggested, structurally intact, spatially confused, full of the accumulated compromises of an institution that had grown faster than its environment. Jack walked it 3 times before he touched a pencil. He moved through the rooms with the quiet attention of someone relearning a language they'd been forbidden to speak, noting load-bearing elements, light behavior at different hours, the way the existing layout created dead zones where human movement naturally wanted to flow. By the end of the first week he had the bones of a concept. By the end of the second, he had drawings. Real ones, done in his own hand, his name in the title block without a pseudonym or a qualifier or anyone else's signature above it. He did not tell Adam how good the work was. He was not sure Adam would have recognized it if he had. Seo-jin visited the site on the 4th Tuesday. He came without his executive team, just his security detail, who positioned themselves outside with the practiced invisibility of men trained not to be noticed. He arrived mid-morning, when Jack was on the upper floor working through a problem with the central stairwell reconfiguration, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before Jack registered his presence. Mr. Lee. Jack straightened. Professional. Composed. The name still sat strangely. The CEO of Obsidian Crown on a foundation renovation site on a Tuesday morning was not, strictly speaking, normal procedure. I was nearby, Seo-jin said, which they both understood was not an explanation. He looked at the drawings spread across the work table. May I? Jack indicated the table. Seo-jin studied the plans with the focused attention of someone who actually knew how to read them. This was, Jack noted, not what most clients did. Most clients looked for the images, the renders, the emotional impression. Seo-jin was reading the technical notation. Following the structural logic. His eyes moved across the drawings the way Jack's did. Methodically, spatially, understanding the building as a system. The stairwell, Seo-jin said. You've moved it. The original placement created a dead corridor on the north side that killed the natural flow between the community spaces. Moving it here, Jack leaned over the drawing without thinking, his finger tracing the revised circulation path, opens the entire ground floor into a connected sequence. It costs 2 offices on the second level, but the brief prioritized public programming over administrative space, so the trade is justified. Seojin looked at the drawing. Then at Jack. Yes, he said simply. It is. They developed a rhythm over the following weeks that neither of them named. Seojin visited on Tuesdays. Sometimes briefly, 20 minutes, a question, a review of the latest drawings. Sometimes longer, when the work invited discussion, when a design problem had multiple solutions and Jack found himself thinking out loud in the presence of someone who followed each option without needing it simplified. Seojin never offered opinions unsolicited. He asked questions, precise, structural, occasionally unexpected, that made Jack think harder about decisions he'd already made and either confirmed them or revealed a gap he hadn't seen. He did not flatter. He did not manage. He engaged. Jack had not been engaged with professionally in so long that the experience sat in his chest like something he didn't have a current word for. He noticed Seojin's hands when he pointed at drawings. He noticed the particular quality of Seojin's attention. Absolute, unhurried, the kind that made a person feel like the only problem worth solving. He filed these observations in the same place he filed everything that couldn't be immediately acted on, which was a place he was running out of room in. He did not know that 3 of Adam's development deals had collapsed in the past month, each for different reasons that shared no obvious common cause. He did not know that Seojin's intelligence director had returned a file containing 14 completed designs filed under a pseudonym across 2 online platforms, and that Seojin had read every one of them on a single night and sat afterward in his penthouse in the particular stillness of a man confronting the full weight of what had been hidden and why. He did not know any of it. He knew only that on Tuesdays, for the first time in 2 years, he felt like himself. And that on Wednesday mornings, the feeling was harder and harder to put away. The 3rd deal collapsed on a Thursday. Adam found out at noon. By the time he came home that evening, he had been carrying it for 6 hours. 6 hours of phone calls that went nowhere, of partners suddenly unavailable, of financing that had been solid the previous week developing inexplicable structural problems that no one could quite explain and everyone was very sorry about. 6 hours of a man watching his professional architecture dissolve and not being able to identify the source. Jack heard the elevator before the door opened. The particular sound of someone who had stopped managing their own weight, footsteps that landed differently, the subtle pressure change of a person filling space with something that hadn't been there that morning. He was at the drafting table he'd set up in the 2nd bedroom, the room Adam called the study and used for storage, which Jack had quietly reclaimed 1 shelf at a time over the past month. Foundation drawings spread across the surface. His good pencils out. His name in the title block. He had just enough time to register the quality of the silence before Adam appeared in the doorway. 3 meetings this week, Adam said. His voice was calibrated, controlled, still, the register of a man choosing precision over volume. 3 site visits. You've been at that building more than the brief requires. The project requires on-site assessment. That's standard practice. He comes to the site personally. He's the client. He is the CEO of a conglomerate worth 11 billion won. He does not make personal site visits to foundation renovation projects. Adam moved into the room, not quickly, but with the particular deliberateness of someone closing distance they had decided to close. Unless the visit isn't about the project. Jack set his pencil down. Turned in his chair to face him fully. Say what you mean, Adam. I mean you're performing. The word landed with the precise ugliness it was intended to carry. You know exactly what you're doing in that room with him. The way you present. The way you, a pause, waited, smell. You're using it deliberately. The accusation was not new in architecture. It was the oldest weapon deployed against omegas in professional spaces, the suggestion that any competence was actually seduction, any recognition actually manipulation, any success actually biology rather than ability. Jack had heard versions of it his entire career. He had not expected to hear it in this specific form, in his own home, from the person who was supposed to stand between him and exactly this. He stood up. "You need to stop talking," Jack said quietly. "Or what?" Adam's voice shifted, the control fraying at the edges, the thing underneath showing through. "You'll run to your alpha client? Tell him your husband is being unreasonable." "He is not. I've seen how he looks at you." Adam stepped forward. "And I've seen how you look at the door on Tuesday mornings." "Adam." The grip came without further warning, Adam's hand closing around Jack's left wrist, the same wrist that had carried a medical bracelet for 6 years before a different set of hands had needed it more. Not a blow. A lock, the particular hold of someone asserting physical fact over verbal argument, the body doing what the words had failed to accomplish. Jack's jaw set. He did not make a sound. The pain was secondary. The recognition of the gesture, its meaning, its message, the thing it confirmed about every calculation he had not quite let himself complete, moved through him like cold water. And then the door to the apartment opened. Seojin's security had been running passive surveillance on the apartment building for 11 days. Standard protocol, Seojin had told his director, asset protection for a contracted project lead. His director had not asked which asset. The physical contact threshold triggered an immediate response. 2 of Seojin's team were in the lobby. 1 was in the building. The call reached Seojin's phone while he was in his car 4 minutes away. He did not send his team ahead. He came himself. He walked through the apartment door with his security director's keycard and the particular quality of stillness that very dangerous people sometimes carry, not the stillness of restraint, but the stillness of a man who has already decided what happens next and is simply moving through the intervening steps. Adam had released Jack's wrist. He was standing in the center of the room with the expression of a man recalibrating his situation very rapidly. Jack was against the drafting table, left hand at his side, not looking at either of them. Seojin did not look at Adam. He looked at Jack's wrist. The bruise was already forming, a pressure mark, 4 fingers wide, the shape of a grip applied with intent. On Jack's left wrist. The same wrist. The same location. Something moved through Seojin's face and was gone in under a second. He said to his security director, without looking away from Jack, "Mr. Thomas will be leaving now. Please arrange his transport." Adam opened his mouth. "Now," Seojin said. The single word had no volume and no flexibility whatsoever. Adam left. The apartment was quiet. Seojin crossed to Jack's drafting table, the drawings, the pencils, the name in the title block, and stood beside it. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Placed something on the table between them. A bracelet. Silver. Thin. Worn smooth with handling. The clasp simple. The kind of object that had lived in a desk drawer for 5 years, carried across 3 cities, present in every office he had occupied since a Tuesday morning in a private hospital when he woke up with a stranger's name in his fist. Jack's eyes found it. The room stopped. Recognition came in layers, first the object, then the memory, then the arithmetic of 5 years assembling itself in real time. His face went very still in the way that faces go still when the body understands something before the mind has finished processing it. His eyes moved from the bracelet to Seojin's face. "You," Jack said. Not a question. Not an accusation. The word of a man arriving, after a very long journey, at a destination he hadn't known he was traveling toward. Seojin met his eyes. "Me?" he said. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Jack picked up the bracelet, looked at it once, the engraving, his own name in small uneven characters, the clasp worn smooth in the way of something handled daily for years, and set it back down on the table with a precision that was not calm. "How long?" he said. 5 years. "How long have you known it was me? Specifically?" "Since the boardroom." A pause. The wrist scar. The same location. Jack turned away from the table. Moved to the window, the 42nd floor, soul spread out below, the same view he stood at every morning with his coffee and his careful not thinking. He stood with his back to Seojin and his arms crossed and the particular posture of a man holding himself together by structural decision rather than ease. "You bought the firm," Jack said. "Yes." "The commission?" "Yes." "The Tuesday visits?" His voice had acquired an edge now, not loud, not breaking, but honed. The site access. All of it. Yes. Jack turned around. The anger, when it arrived fully, was not the performed kind. It didn't raise its voice or lose its grammar. It was the cold, architectural fury of a man who had spent 2 years being systematically diminished and had just discovered that his exit from that diminishment had also been, in some form, however well-intentioned, designed by someone else. I carried you out of a burning building, Jack said. I made a decision in approximately 4 seconds based on the fact that you were a human being who was going to die if I didn't move. That's all it was. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't an obligation. It wasn't an invitation for someone to spend 5 years building a case file on my life and engineering my professional circumstances without telling me. I know. I am not a debt. The words landed with full weight. I am not something you owe. I am not a problem you get to solve from 50 floors up because it makes your ledger balance. I have spent the last 2 years being managed by someone who thought my life was his to arrange, and I will not, step out of that directly into another version of the same thing, regardless of the intent behind it. Seojin said nothing. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, Seojin said. Every word. The agreement stopped Jack for a moment. He had been braced, at some level, for defense. For the reasonable explanation. For the careful reframing that would make Seojin's choices sound like something other than what they were. Adam had been masterful at that particular maneuver. Seojin simply stood in the middle of the room and accepted everything Jack said without moving to deflect a single part of it. You're right, Seojin said, when it was clear Jack had finished. His voice was even, not flat, not managed, but honest in the unadorned way of someone who had decided that the only thing left worth offering was the truth without ornament. I didn't handle this well. I told myself I was being careful, that I was finding the right moment, the right approach. The reality is that I didn't know how to introduce myself to you without immediately making you feel exactly what you feel right now. So I postponed it. I built circumstances instead of simply walking through a door and telling you the truth. He paused. I should have told you at the dinner. Yes, Jack said. You should have. I didn't come to save you, Seojin said. I want to be clear about that. I came because I owed you something I couldn't repay and I needed to find you before I could figure out what that meant. What I found when I got here, a brief pause, the first crack in the evenness, that wasn't what I was looking for. What Adam has done. What's been done to your career, your work, he stopped. Restarted. What you do with that is yours. It has always been yours. I have not once believed otherwise. The room was very quiet. Then what, Jack said carefully, are you offering me? Seojin crossed to the drafting table. He placed his phone on top of the foundation drawings, screen up, a file already open. Then he stepped back, putting the full width of the table between himself and Jack. Information, he said. That's all. The file was comprehensive. Adam Thomas's financial records going back 4 years, 2 counts of fraudulent misrepresentation to investors, 1 instance of document falsification in a commercial lease agreement, 3 deals structured to redirect losses onto minority partners. Parallel documentation of the suppressant management, prescription records, pharmacy logs, a timeline that cross-referenced Adam's travel schedule against the dates Jack's prescription had been filled at the low-end dosage. Medical correspondence. A log of reported incidents compiled from building security footage over 14 months, showing a pattern of physical intimidation that stopped just short of what the law found easy to act on. Seojin's lawyers had compiled it. Every document was legitimate, legally obtained, evidentiary in quality. None of it told Jack anything he hadn't already known. All of it told it in a language that a courtroom would understand. Jack stood at the table and read for a long time. Seojin sat in the chair by the window, not watching, or not appearing to watch, and said nothing. Offered nothing. Did not suggest a course of action or outline a plan or indicate in any direction what Jack should do next. Just Saturday. And waited. And left the door completely, unconditionally open. Jack closed the file. He stood with his hand flat on the table, on top of his own drawings, his name in the title block underneath his palm. I'll need a lawyer, he said. My firm will make a referral. The attorney would be yours, retained independently, reporting only to you. I'll be signing my own name to everything. I would expect nothing else." Jack looked at him for a long moment, the full, assessing look of someone deciding whether the architecture of a thing will actually hold the weight being placed on it. Then he picked up the file. Not Seojin's file. His evidence. His case. The documentation of his own life that he was going to walk into a lawyer's office and build into a door, and open himself, with his own hands, and walk through under his own power. He picked it up and held it with the steadiness of a man who had, 5 years ago, carried something much heavier through fire. "I'll be in touch about the foundation drawings," Jack said. "The project timeline hasn't changed." Seojin stood. Understood. He picked up his phone from the table. Paused at the bracelet, still lying between the drawings. He left it there. Jack didn't tell him to take it. 3 weeks later, Jack Hita walked out of his marriage with a legal filing, a signed separation agreement, and his name on every document. He had compiled the case himself. He had instructed the lawyers himself. He had sat across from Adam Thomas in a mediator's office and delivered the evidence with the same focused precision he used to assess structural load. Methodical, accurate, completely without performance. Adam had tried 3 different versions of the reasonable explanation. Jack had listened to all of them with the patience of a man who no longer needed to argue with a burning building. He simply presented the documents. Let them speak in the language Adam understood. And walked out into the sole afternoon under his own name, in his own body, at his own suppressant dosage for the first time in 28 months, the sharp edges of himself returning slowly, like feeling coming back into a limb that had been held at the wrong angle for too long. He did not call Seojin. He went to the foundation building, let himself in with his site key, and stood in the half-renovated atrium where the light came through at the angle he'd planned for, the one that would make the whole ground floor feel like it was breathing. He stood there for a long time. Then he sat down at his work table, picked up his pencil, and got back to work. The leak dropped on a Monday morning. Not through a journalist, that would have been too traceable. Through a financial commentary platform with a reputation for well-sourced corporate intelligence, the kind of outlet that powerful people used when they wanted information to move without fingerprints. The piece was careful, legally buffered, and precise in the way of something written by someone who knew exactly where the lines were and had measured their words to land just inside them. The headline, Obsidian Crown CEO's Personal Intervention in Domestic Dispute Raises Questions of Resource Misuse. The substance, Seojin Lee had deployed company intelligence assets to surveil a private individual. Had used corporate legal resources to support an Omega in a bonding dispute. Had commissioned a charitable foundation renovation through a contractor with whom he had a personal connection undisclosed at time of engagement. Had, the piece implied with the careful grammar of plausible deniability, allowed a personal obsession to compromise the operational integrity of a publicly accountable organization. Every fact in it was technically accurate. The framing was a weapon. Seojin read it at 6:15 in the morning, standing in his kitchen with his coffee, and understood immediately what it was and who had produced it. The board members who had ordered the Daejeon fire had spent 5 years watching him rebuild and waiting for a pressure point. They had just found one, or believed they had. He called his communications director at 6:17. No response today. Let it move. Sir, the market is all ready. Let it move, he said again. I'll be in the office at 8. He set down his phone and finished his coffee. In the 5 years since Daejeon, he had rebuilt Obsidian Crown on a foundation specifically designed for a moment like this. Every resource deployment had been documented with legal authorization. The Foundation Commission had been processed through a legitimate tender process, abbreviated, but procedurally sound. The intelligence assets used to document Adam Thomas's crimes had been handed to law enforcement through proper channels with full disclosure of their origin. The board had struck early. They had not struck carefully. Seojin had been waiting for them to move for 5 years. He was ready. What he had not calculated, what genuinely sat outside his prepared response architecture, was Jack. Jack saw the piece at 7:45. He was at the foundation building, already on site, coffee in one hand and site notes in the other, when his phone began moving with messages from professional contacts he hadn't heard from in months, people whose sudden reappearance told him, before he'd read a word, that something had shifted in the atmosphere around his name. He read the piece standing in the atrium, in the light he had planned for. Surrounded by walls that were, at this point, more his than anyone else's, every spatial decision in this building bearing the mark of his thinking, his hand, his professional judgment over 4 months of serious work. He read it twice. Carefully. The same way he read structural documents, looking for the load-bearing elements, the points of actual stress, the places where the thing would fail if challenged correctly. Then he called his attorney. "I want to make a statement," he said. "Today. Can you have the legal parameters to me within the hour?" A pause on the other end. "Jack, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Jack said. "I want to." "Parameters, please. Within the hour." The statement went out at noon through Jack's own professional registration, not through Obsidian Crown's communications, not through any channel that could be traced to Seagen's infrastructure. His attorney reviewed it. Jack wrote every word himself. It was not defensive. It did not explain or apologize or soften. It was the precise, professional account of an architectural designer who had been engaged through a legitimate commission process, had completed work of documented quality, and was in the process of making that work public through a scheduled foundation presentation that had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. It named the project. It named his qualifications. It attached a compressed portfolio of the foundation designs, not renders, not mood boards, but the full technical documentation. Structural drawings. Spatial analyses. Material specifications. The complete professional record of 4 months of exceptional work, signed with his name, filed with the relevant professional bodies, timestamped and irrefutable. The work speaks for itself, the final line read. "I am content to let it." The foundation presentation had been scheduled for the following Thursday. The board's legal team filed a challenge to the commission's validity on Tuesday. Undue influence, undisclosed personal relationship between contractor and client, procedural irregularity in the tender process. The challenge required a response hearing. The hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning. Jack attended it himself. He sat at the respondent's table with his attorney and his documentation and the particular composure of a man who had been carrying his own case for long enough that the weight of it had become familiar. The board's representatives were senior, expensive, and prepared for a contractor who would be rattled by the institutional pressure of a formal challenge. Jack was not rattled. He had walked through a burning building at 24 years old and carried a man twice his professional weight out on his back. A challenge hearing conducted in a climate-controlled room by men in expensive suits did not constitute equivalent pressure. He presented his documentation for 40 minutes. Answered every procedural question with the accuracy of someone who had anticipated each one. When the board's representative suggested that the commission relationship had been personally motivated rather than professionally assessed, Jack opened his portfolio to the structural drawings and asked the representative, directly, to identify a single technical deficiency in the work. The representative could not. The challenge was dismissed before noon. Seojin was in the back of the hearing room. Not at the table, he had no standing in this particular proceeding, and more importantly, he understood that his presence at the table would have reframed the entire event as something Jack needed backing for. He sat in the observer section, to the side, mostly obscured by the room's configuration. He watched Jack present. He had read the foundation designs the night the portfolio went public, had sat at his desk at 11 in the evening and gone through every drawing with the full attention they deserved, and had understood, with the clarity of someone who had spent 5 years holding a bracelet engraved with this man's name, that the work was extraordinary. Not promising. Not impressive for the circumstances. Extraordinary, the kind of spatial thinking that announced a significant architectural voice without requiring anyone's permission or endorsement. He had known Jack was talented. The dinner had shown him that. The Tuesday visits had confirmed it. He had not been prepared for the full scale of it. Now he watched Jack close his portfolio, acknowledge the panel's dismissal with a single composed nod, and stand to leave, and felt something move through his chest that had no corporate vocabulary and did not need any. Jack's eyes found him across the room as he turned toward the exit. A brief contact, a second, maybe less. Acknowledgement without performance. The look of two people who have been circling the same truth long enough that the distance between them has become a formality neither is quite maintaining anymore. Jack left. Seo-jin remained in his seat for a moment. And then, for the first time in a room connected to his professional life, in a context involving his board, his company, and a fight he had been building toward for 5 years, he smiled. Not the boardroom smile. Not the cold, calibrated expression he deployed to make rooms uncertain and opponents careful. The other one. The one that had no strategy in it. The one that arrived without permission and didn't wait to be appropriate. The one that, in 34 years, very few people had ever been in the right position to see. His security director, standing 3 feet away, noticed it and said nothing. He had worked for Seo-jin Lee for 6 years. He had never seen that expression before. He made a private note that whatever happened next, it was going to be different from everything that had come before. He was right. Adam Thomas was charged on a Friday. Fraud. Financial misrepresentation. A pattern of coercive control documented across 28 months with the kind of evidentiary precision that made defense attorneys quietly advise their clients toward settlement conversations. The charges were filed by the relevant authorities through standard channels, supported by documentation that had been compiled legally, handled correctly, and delivered without drama. Jack was not present for the filing. He was at the foundation building, working. He found out through his attorney's message, read it once, set his phone face down on the work table, and finished the section of detailed drawing he had been in the middle of. When it was done, complete, accurate, his name in the block, he allowed himself 30 seconds of stillness. Then he picked up his pencil and moved to the next sheet. He had learned, in the months since he walked out of his marriage, that the absence of a weight you have carried for a long time does not feel like relief. Not immediately. It feels like the strange lightness of a body that has not yet recalibrated to its own unencumbered dimensions. Relief came later, in increments, quietly, in the moments when he made a professional decision and did not wait for it to be questioned. When he spoke in a meeting and did not monitor his own voice for the register that invited correction. When he woke up on a Tuesday morning and felt, simply, like himself. It accumulated. Slowly, and then all at once, the way structural loads redistribute after a constraint is removed. He was, by the time the charges were filed, already someone Adam Thomas could no longer reach. The board's exposure came 10 days later. Seo-jin had chosen the timing with the same patience he brought to everything that mattered, not the first available moment, but the right one. The challenge hearing had forced the board's hand publicly. The leak had been traced, documented, and added to a file that had been building for 5 years. The members who had arranged the Daejeon warehouse explosion, 3 of them, senior, insulated by layers of corporate structure that had taken Seo-jin the better part of a decade to methodically dismantle, were named in a criminal referral filed simultaneously with regulatory complaints in 2 jurisdictions. The intelligence that supported it was Seo-jin's. The 5 years of covert reconstruction, the shadow network built from a hospital bed, the empire grown partly as cover and partly as instrument, all of it had been moving toward this specific point. The fire had never been resolved. Seo-jin had never intended to resolve it publicly until he could do so completely. The story moved through the financial press like a structural collapse, first the sound, then the dust, then the full accounting of what had fallen. Obsidian Crown stock dropped 14% in the first hour and recovered by end of day when the full scope of Seo-jin's prepared restructuring plan became clear. New board composition. Governance reforms. A formal separation of the foundation's operations from the corporate structure, endowed with independent funding and a 10-year mandate. The Grey Empire, methodically and publicly, was becoming something else. Seo-jin held a press conference that lasted 22 minutes. He answered every question directly. He did not perform humility or theater. He presented the facts, the plan, and the future in the even tone of a man who had been waiting a long time to say all of it out loud. Afterward, he drove to Mapo-gu. The foundation building was finished. Not nearly finished, not substantially complete, finished. Every spatial decision resolved, every material in place, the light behaving exactly as Jack had calculated it would at every hour of the day. The atrium breathed. The community spaces connected in the sequence Jack had planned from the 3rd week, the flow of movement through the building as natural as water finding its level. His name was on the plaques. His firm's name, Hita Design Studio, registered 6 weeks prior, its first completed project already generating the kind of professional attention that arrives when work is genuinely exceptional and refuses to be ignored, was on the commissioning documentation. The launch event was small, deliberate, attended by the people whose professional opinion Jack had decided were worth having in the room. No ceremony for its own sake. Just the work, and the people who understood it, and the quiet authority of a designer who had stopped apologizing for taking up professional space. Seo-jin attended as the client. He stood to the side, as he had learned to do, and watched Jack move through the room, answering questions, explaining decisions, inhabiting his own expertise with the ease of someone who had stopped waiting for permission to do so. He was not the Jack from the boardroom, 2 steps behind and eyes trained carefully downward. He was not even the Jack from the early Tuesday visits, brilliant but braced, talent running just ahead of his own belief in it. He was simply Jack. Fully. Taking up exactly the space he was supposed to take up. Seo-jin stayed until the last guest left. Then he followed Jack up the internal staircase to the rooftop terrace, Jack's addition, not in the original brief, proposed in week 6 and approved without hesitation. A flat deck with a low perimeter wall, oriented to face the city. Simple. Honest. The kind of space that understood its own purpose without needing to announce it. Seoul was doing what Seoul did at night, blazing and indifferent and magnificent, 10 million lit windows against a sky that had given up on darkness. They stood at the parapet and did not immediately speak, which had become, over months of Tuesday mornings and site visits and parallel silences, one of their most fluent modes of communication. Seo-jin reached into his jacket pocket. He placed the bracelet on the flat top of the parapet wall between them, silver, thin, worn smooth, his name inside its clasp not engraved but present in the 5 years of handling that had burnished it beyond its original finish. "You never let me return it," he said. Jack looked at it. The city moved below them, indifferent to the weight of what was sitting on a parapet wall on a rooftop in Mapogu. Jack had carried this moment for 5 years without knowing it, the way you carry a question whose answer you haven't yet been given the right conditions to receive. He looked at it for a long time. Then he reached out, not for the bracelet, but for Seo-jin's wrist. He took it in his hand with the same quiet certainty he brought to structural decisions, turned it over, and placed the bracelet there. Closed the clasp. Let his fingers rest on it for one moment before releasing. "Then you keep it," Jack said. "Since you've been so determined." Seo-jin looked down at his own wrist. At the silver against his skin. At the name engraved inside that was Jack's and not his and that he had been carrying for 5 years as both debt and compass. When he looked up, Jack was already watching him, not with the careful, monitored expression of a man managing his own face, but openly. The way a person looks when they have stopped performing safety and started simply being present. "I should tell you," Seo-jin said, "that I have no architecture for this. For any of this. Everything else I have built from a plan. There was no plan for you." "I know," Jack said. "I would have spotted a plan." "Yes," Seo-jin said. "You would have." The city glittered below them without comment. The empire stood, restructured, legitimate, its long shadow finally falling in a direction its founder had chosen rather than inherited. The building beneath their feet was complete, Jack's name on every document, the first proof of something that would grow into more than either of them had mapped yet. They were 2 people who had circled the same truth for 5 years through fire and distance and the elaborate architecture of 2 men who did not easily ask for what they needed. They were done circling. Seo-jin's hand turned on the parapet wall, a small movement, unhurried, without performance. Jack's hand was already there. Below them, Seoul blazed on, as it always had, as it always would, indifferent to the specific gravity of any 2 people finding each other on a rooftop. But they had found each other. And for the first time in 5 years, neither of them was searching for anything. I really hope you enjoyed watching this. If you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves a good romance story. Drop a comment below telling me your favorite part of the story or what kind of story you want to see next. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.